One of the most serious security flaws that Microsoft had to fix in 2023 was a vulnerability in Outlook that could expose your emails to hackers. The vulnerability was discovered by researchers from Wiz, a cloud security company, in January 2023, and it allowed attackers to alter Bing results and access Office 365 data, including Outlook emails. The vulnerability, known as CVE 2023-29325, was an elevation of privilege (OP) issue that affected all Microsoft Outlook products on the Windows operating system. It exploited a flaw in the way Outlook processed a special property called PIDLID reminder file parameter, which is used to store information about reminders for calendar events or tasks. By crafting a malicious email message, calendar invite, or task containing this property, an attacker could trick Outlook into connecting to a remote server controlled by the hacker. This would expose the victim's net NTLM-v2 hash, which is a cryptographic representation of their Windows credentials. The attacker could then use the hash to authenticate as the victim in an NTLM relay attack, which is a technique that allows bypassing authentication mechanisms and accessing network resources. In this case, the attacker could use the relay attack to modify Bing search results displayed in Outlook and inject malicious links or content. The attacker could also use the relay attack to access Office 365 data belonging to the victim, such as their Outlook emails, contacts, calendar events, and tasks. This vulnerability was extremely critical because it required no user interaction and could be exploited before the email was viewed in the preview pane. It also affected millions of Outlook users worldwide who relied on the email client for their daily communication and work. Moreover, the vulnerability was actively exploited in the wild by Russian-based hackers who targeted a small number of organizations in Ukraine and other countries. Microsoft was notified of the vulnerability by Wiz researchers in January 2023 and released a patch for it on March 14, 2023 as part of its monthly security update. However, the patch was incomplete and did not fully prevent the exploitation of the vulnerability. Ben Barnia from Akamai discovered a bypass for the patch and reported it to Microsoft. The bypass involved using a different property called PIDLID reminder signal time instead of PIDLID reminder file parameter to trigger the vulnerability. Microsoft released another patch for the vulnerability on May 9, 2023 that addressed the bypass and fixed the issue completely. The Outlook vulnerability CVE 2023-29325 was one of the most severe and dangerous security flaws that Microsoft had to deal with in 2023. It exposed millions of Outlook users to potential data theft and compromise by hackers who could alter Bing results and access Office 365 data. It also showed how complex and challenging it is to patch vulnerabilities that affect widely used software products. Users who use Outlook for Windows should make sure they have installed the latest updates from Microsoft to protect themselves from this threat. In this section, we will explain how Microsoft fixed a radical Outlook security flaw that could expose your emails. The vulnerability was caused by a misconfiguration in the Azure Active Directory service, which did not properly validate users for some multi-tenant applications on Azure. Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, is a cloud-based identity and access management service that enables your employees to access external resources, such as Microsoft 365, the Azure portal, and thousands of other SaaS applications. Azure AD also helps them access internal resources like apps on your corporate intranet, and any cloud apps developed for your own organization. Azure Active Directory Domain Services, Azure ADDS, is a part of Azure AD that provides managed domain services such as domain join, group policy, LDAP, and Kerberos/NTLM authentication. You can use these domain services without the need to deploy, manage, and patch domain controllers, DCs, in the cloud. The security flaw was discovered by researchers from CyberArk Labs, who found that some multi-tenant applications on Azure were not properly validating users against their Azure AD tenant. This means that an attacker could impersonate any user from any tenant and access their emails through Outlook Web Access, OWA. The root cause of the vulnerability was a misconfiguration in the Azure ADDS service, which allowed users to authenticate with any tenant ID instead of their own. This misconfiguration was introduced when Microsoft migrated some of its legacy applications from on-premises to Azure. Microsoft fixed the vulnerability by enforcing strict tenant validation for all multi-tenant applications on Azure. They also notified affected customers and advised them to reset their passwords and enable multi-factor authentication (MFA) as a precaution. By fixing this security flaw, Microsoft has protected millions of Outlook users from potential email exposure and data theft. The vulnerability also highlights the importance of proper configuration and validation of Azure AD/DS service for multi-tenant applications on Azure. Microsoft patched the vulnerability by March 20, 2023 and said there was no evidence of prior abuse. However, this was not the end of the story. A security researcher from Akamai discovered a way to bypass the patch and exploit the same flaw again. This bypass, tracked as CVE 2023-29324, was reported to Microsoft and fixed in May 2023. The bypass involved tricking a security check that was supposed to prevent Outlook from connecting to remote servers using the SMB protocol and leaking NTLM hashes. NTLM hashes are encrypted versions of Windows credentials that can be used to access network resources. By sending a malicious email with a custom reminder sound, an attacker could make Outlook think that a remote path was a local one and connect to it, sending the NTLM hash in the process. This could allow the attacker to steal or impersonate the user's identity on the network. The original flaw, CVE 2023-23397, was exploited in the wild by a Russian state-sponsored group known as Strontium, Fancy Bear, or APT-28. They targeted government, military, energy, and transportation organizations in Europe with this zero-click attack. Microsoft said that they did not see any evidence of this group using the bypass technique, but they urged users to apply both patches as soon as possible to protect themselves from this serious threat.